Here is a psychological truth you are not ready to face. The more desperately you need approval, the less of a self you actually have. If you constantly need to be liked, reassured, chosen, validated, or emotionally confirmed by other people, this is going to hurt. Because Nietzsche would not have seen that as kindness, humility, or emotional sensitivity. He would have seen it as weakness, wearing good manners. And the most dangerous part is that most men never notice when this weakness becomes the center of their personality. The need for approval rarely enters a man's life dramatically. It does not arrive like a collapse. It arrives quietly, almost invisibly, disguised as normal behavior. You say something and immediately wonder how it was received. You send a message and keep checking your phone. You walk into a room and instinctively start measuring how people react to your presence. You soften your opinions, edit your tone, hide certain parts of yourself, and slowly become more concerned with being accepted than with being real. Psychology would describe this as dependence on external validation, a life organized around emotional signals from other people. Their praise lifts you, their silence disturbs you, their disapproval lingers in your mind. And once this pattern takes hold, it begins to shape everything: your relationships, your confidence, your ambition, even the way you understand your own identity. Because the man who needs approval is no longer living from an inner center. He is living from the outside in. And Nietzsche understood something brutal about that condition. The moment your worth depends on the crowd, you stop becoming a creator and start becoming a reflection. The tragedy is that approval-seeking does not feel like weakness in the beginning. It feels like being likable. It feels like being socially intelligent, emotionally aware, easy to love, easy to keep around. From a young age, many people learn that approval makes life smoother. If you behave the right way, people reward you. If you say the right thing, you stay included. If you become agreeable enough, useful enough, harmless enough, people respond well to you. So you adapt. You laugh when you do not want to laugh. You apologize when you are not wrong. You become careful with your honesty. You learn to monitor your expression, your tone, your opinions, your reactions. And because the world often rewards that adaptation, you mistake it for maturity. But over time, something underneath begins to decay. You begin to notice that praise never satisfies you for long. You begin to notice how anxious silence makes you. You begin to notice how often you become a different person depending on who is in front of you. And then a painful question starts to form. If I am always adjusting myself to be accepted, then who am I when nobody is watching? This is where Nietzsche becomes useful, because Nietzsche was not interested in making people more socially comfortable. He was interested in whether a person had enough strength to live from his own values. And the man who constantly needs approval usually does not. He has reactions instead of convictions, performance instead of identity, adaptation instead of self-respect. That is what makes this pattern so dangerous. It teaches a man to abandon himself before anyone else even gets the chance to reject him. But this is where the real problem begins, because the need for approval is not just an annoying emotional habit. It is much deeper than that. It is not just insecurity. It is a philosophy of weakness. And once you see it that way, you begin to understand why so many men look functional on the outside while feeling hollow on the inside. Nietzsche believed that most people do not truly live by values they have examined and chosen for themselves. They live by inherited values, absorbed from religion, morality, family, society, and the silent rules of the crowd. In other words, most people do not ask, what is truly worthy, they ask, what will be accepted, and that single shift changes an entire life. A man who needs approval does not choose his behavior based on strength, truth, or self-command. He chooses it based on safety. He learns what gets rewarded, what gets applause, what keeps him included, what avoids tension, what prevents exclusion. Over time, he begins constructing a personality designed not for truth, but for survival. And that is why approval-seeking so often hides behind traits that look admirable on the surface. Niceness, humility, patience, restraint, even kindness. These can be real virtues, but they can also be camouflage. Sometimes what looks like kindness is just fear of disapproval. Sometimes what looks like humility is a refusal to stand fully in one's own power. Sometimes what looks like peace is simply an inability to tolerate conflict. Nietzsche would have looked directly at this and asked a merciless question. Are you good, or are you simply too afraid to be dangerous? Because those are not the same thing, and this is where the pattern becomes even more destructive. The more approval a man needs, the more his nervous system becomes emotionally dependent on the reactions of others. Their silence feels like rejection. Their disagreement feels like judgment. Their distance feels like a threat. He begins overthinking tone, scanning faces, replaying conversations, craving reassurance, monitoring the room for signs that he is still accepted. His emotional stability becomes outsourced, and the brain reinforces this because approval produces relief. A compliment, a reply, a smile, an invitation. Each one creates a brief moment of safety, not strength, not freedom, just temporary relief from fear. And relief can become addictive. This is why so many men confuse attention with respect, acceptance with worth, and approval with love. But Nietzsche's philosophy moves in the opposite direction. He admired the individual who could stand apart, endure misunderstanding, and create values instead of borrowing them. To him, a life organized around approval was not a moral life, nor a noble one. It was a dependent life, a life still asking for permission. If this already feels uncomfortably personal, subscribe now, because this channel is for people who want truth, not comfort. And if you've ever felt trapped between being accepted and being yourself, stay with me, because what Nietzsche saw in that struggle was far more brutal than most people realize. Here is the brutal truth. You are not exhausted because people are difficult to please. You are exhausted because you have built your identity around pleasing them. That is the humiliation most people never want to face. Not that others reject them, but that they trained themselves to need approval in the first place. A weak man does not always look broken. Sometimes he looks polished, socially smooth, emotionally intelligent, even admired. But deep down, he cannot move unless someone nods. He cannot fully speak unless the room permits it. He cannot desire anything without first checking whether that desire will be accepted. He cannot even be honest without editing himself for applause. Nietzsche would have seen this not as virtue, but as slavery. Not slavery to chains, but slavery to opinion, slavery to the herd, slavery to the terror of standing alone. That is why the need for approval is so corrosive. It does not merely weaken your confidence, it replaces your inner law with public reaction. It makes your worth dependent on unstable forces outside of you. And once that happens, you no longer live according to what is true. You live according to what is least likely to get you abandoned. But there is one part of this that almost nobody has the courage to admit. Most approval seeking is not really about love. It is about fear. And once you understand that, the entire pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Fear of what? fear of exclusion, fear of being judged, fear of being ordinary, fear of being disliked, fear of not mattering, fear of being left behind. Once you see that clearly, everything starts making sense. It explains why criticism can stay in your mind for days. It explains why being ignored can feel unbearable. It explains why some men chase emotionally unavailable people, why they over-explain themselves, why they shrink their real opinions, why they become desperate to be chosen. Their ego has made a deal with fear. It says, if enough people approve of me, I will finally be safe. But that safety never arrives. It cannot arrive because approval is unstable by nature. People change, crowds shift, praise fades, attention moves, and the man who depends on unstable things becomes unstable himself. Nietzsche saw this kind of dependence everywhere, even in bigger forms. He believed that human beings were constantly kneeling before idols outside themselves: religion, moral systems, dogma, inherited truths, social expectations, and approval is one of the most modern idols of all. People may not kneel at old altars the way they once did, but now they kneel before reputation, social acceptance, desirability, status, and emotional validation. The posture is the same. The object has changed. This is what makes approval so spiritually corrosive. It teaches a man to live as if his center exists somewhere outside him. And when a man loses his center, everything becomes performance. His relationships become strategy. His confidence becomes theater. His morality becomes submission. His ambition becomes whatever gets rewarded. He no longer asks, "What do I actually believe?" He asks, "What version of me will be accepted?" Nietzsche would have seen that as a deeply modern form of weakness, because the individual loses the ability to create himself. He becomes shaped by applause, corrected by fear, and governed by the crowd. That is the true cost of needing approval too much. You stop becoming a person and start becoming a response. If this makes you uncomfortable, good. That discomfort means something important has finally been touched. Because here is the truth most people spend years running from. The life you call being nice may actually be a long habit of self-erasure. So, what is the way out? Nietzsche's answer would never be cheap motivation or soft reassurance. It would begin with something harder. Stop asking to be approved of by people you do not even respect. Stop treating acceptance as evidence of worth. Stop confusing being tolerated with being loved. And most of all, stop building your character around the emotional comfort of the crowd. The first real step is simple but difficult. Tell the truth more often, especially when truth risks disapproval. Not unnecessary aggression, not performance, not rebellion for attention, just truth. Truth in your preferences, truth in your standards, truth in your boundaries, truth in your desires. Because every time you tell the truth without manipulating it for acceptance, you reclaim a piece of yourself. And that matters, because Nietzsche's deeper point was never that life becomes meaningful when everyone agrees with you. It was that life becomes powerful when you stop living secondhand. The stronger man is not the loudest man, nor the cruelest, nor the most admired. He is the man who can endure being misunderstood without betraying himself. He is the man who no longer needs to ask the room for permission to exist. He is the man who creates his values instead of renting them from the opinions of others. Everything changes when you finally understand this. Approval feels good, but it is a terrible foundation for a life. The moment you stop worshiping it, you become far more dangerous in the best possible way. More honest, more stable, more difficult to manipulate, more free. Maybe that is what Nietzsche saw so clearly, that many men are not destroyed by hatred, failure, or pain. They are destroyed much earlier by the quiet habit of needing to be approved of, by the slow surrender of self, by the decision to trade inner authority for social safety. And maybe the real turning point in a man's life begins the moment he sees that clearly, feels how humiliating it is, and decides that from now on, being respected by himself will matter more than being accepted by everyone else. If this video made you see something in yourself that you can no longer ignore, subscribe to The Philosopher's Shadow, because this channel is not here to flatter you. It's here to confront you with the truths that make you stronger. And if this message stayed with you, leave a comment with just one word: freedom.